Nowadays, the general public knows more about retrograde periods than they used to because of the famous Mercury retrograde, which causes things like electronics to malfunction and communication to go haywire. Less is known, however, about the Venus retrograde period. Venus will be going retrograde in Capricorn on December 19th. And unlike Mercury retrograde, this isn't a yearly occurrence, and this cosmic event only takes place every 18 months or so. Venus pertains to 4 areas of life experience, each of which may shift or cause some confusion during this time period. So it's important to be aware of what can be coming. Now, Venus pertains to values, relationships, aesthetics, and money. Now, if Mercury goes retrograde, we all have to deal with the principles of redoing, redefining, and rethinking everything pertaining to Mercury and what that planet signifies. Now, when you put Venus in Capricorn, which it will be in Capricorn until March 5th of 2022, you think about like why it's in that sign for so long at this time period. And Venus in Capricorn is really here to restructure our values. Restructuring Capricorn. Venus is values. Now, typically retrogrades are about reevaluating what's working, what's not, and if it's aligning with your path. Venus retrograde also points and emphasizes on the Taurus side of Venus. Venus rules over Taurus and Libra. So Taurus is our essential needs, our survival patterns. And the Taurus side in relation to Venus is all about one's inner relationship to oneself. It is also about the learning to be self-reliant and learning to identify one's own inner resources in order to sustain oneself. So with the Taurus archetype, it's all about what constitutes meaning in one's life. Venus rules over an earth sign because values are really practical in a sense. I like the way values are described in the book Think Like a Monk. Values are described as a kind of ethical GPS we can use to navigate through life. If you know your values, you have directions that point you toward the people and actions and habits that are best for you. Just as when we drive through a new area and we wander aimlessly, without values, we take wrong turns, we get lost, we're trapped by indecision. So values make it easier for you to surround yourself with the right people. So defining one's values on a personal and social level will allow you to relate to others from the point of view of being centered within oneself, right? Taurus, self, relations, Libra, Venus rules over both. Now, Venus is about relationships across the board. They talk a lot about old friends and former lovers and distant relatives making an appearance during Venus retrograde. And how many have you experienced like communications for people that you haven't heard from in a while during Mercury retrograde? And then suddenly they recommunicate with you. And so with Venus retrograde, you might be hearing from like your exes or, you know, or be thinking a lot about past relationships. And you have to ask yourself, like, what is being redone or what is being reestablished, and what's the purpose behind these reappearances? And retrograde planets always convey some sense of looking into the past and learning from it. During Venus retrograde, we review our relationships, and with Venus conjunct Pluto, it's going to really bring out what's beneath their surface and questioning whether your needs are being met in your relationship. You know, Venus pertains to harmony especially socially. And when it is retrograde, harmony is difficult to maintain. So you or your partner could summon up all those forgotten, festering wounds, feeling an impulse to recreate hurting scenarios in relationships in hopes of reassessing those wounds in order to perhaps this time heal them to perfection. So partnerships could be a source of struggle or a source of empowerment and healing. And these difficulties can make patterns of behavior more conscious and lead ultimately to acceptance. And I think a lot of it has to do with contemplating the sustainability, Capricorn, of your romantic relationships. So the same advice also applies to any relationships or collaborations you may have, including at work. So this is a time to also review your investments. And relationships, you invest time too, right? But on a work or business level, you'll be reviewing more of like your assets and possibly your financial goals. We could realize that a lot of what we thought was important really isn't. Our values are defined by what we experience. So we may begin to understand how the trauma of the past 2 years with the global pandemic has shifted what we value. So take time to review, and we could discover that we have been putting our resources into projects that are not fulfilling. And so we have to create a vision board and a budget. So you need to figure out what you stand for in this time and where you want to go with your work or business relationship. Now, Venus in Capricorn is serious and is more determined to create strong boundaries to achieve and to build in these areas. This Venus retrograde journey will last a fabled 40 days and 40 nights. So if you think about it, the number 40 shows up in the Bible during the context of judgment and testing, which are Saturn themes. And the Great Flood, it rained for 40 days. Jesus fasted for 40 days. 40 days between Jesus' resurrection and his ascension. 40 meant, in a way, a new start or a new beginning, or in some instances, a period of testing. In every case in scripture, when we find the number 40, it is linked to purification. And so Capricorn is about doing the right thing spiritually speaking. The judgment that you might feel comes from within, from a voice saying, hey, you are not doing what you're supposed to do with your life, or practice makes mastery, don't take shortcuts. So you might be hearing these kind of internal messages, and your excuses to not take responsibility won't work unless you resort to escapist tendencies or develop cognitive dissonance, which is well developed in this society. But eventually the sense of guilt and fear or lack of self-confidence, those symptoms will sooner or later, through another transit of Saturn or your Saturn return, it will reawaken truth, and you'll have to have an honest look at yourself, and poof, the illusions you acted in a way might be challenged in the future. So this is where we have to ask ourselves why we weren't able to reach maturity. I once heard astrologer Carolyn Casey use this analogy when talking about Mercury retrograde, where she said that it is like a bow and arrow, and the further back you go and the deeper in you go, the further forward your life can shoot when the planet stations direct again.